You're a scholar, you're a trained scholar, you are a طالب العلم, and I would like to think you are a طالب العلم for life. And you've been working in the community for years, perhaps before I was even born. Um, we're living in times where I feel like a lot of adults are starting to learn the religion a bit more serious. They're taking it more seriously. They're learning Quran, learning Arabic, learning the basics of their religion. And I think that's a very good thing. What advice would you give to young people or young adults, or adults in general, perhaps pursuing or wanting to pursue Islamic knowledge? What would be your advice on that, especially with our current, conditions of, lockdown and whatnot?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, Alhamdulillah, we do live in a society where market forces tend to drive activity, and with this demand in learning that you've just mentioned, there's also been an increase in provision. Alhamdulillah. I remember when I first started Ibrahim College. Um, the opposite was true. We had the idea to provide flexible learning for adults, and I think there was only one other provider that was known in London, well known in London. And we had the situation where there was no demand, and we had to convince people through various marketing type messaging to help them understand that it's extremely important that you learn your deen, and that your learning doesn't end when you left maktab as a child, or madrasa as a child. But alhamdulillah, things have moved on now, and there's a lot of provision out there. And because of COVID, I suppose one silver lining is that there's been an explosion in online provision. So I think now it's very, very easy to find provision. The key is to find provision that is, that you can trust, that's provided by ulama who are reputable and so on. So you go. The thing is, online is its own world, and sometimes people have their own pre-existing habits about how they verify things online. Um, it's important that nowadays, with a lot of the learning going online, and at least for the foreseeable future, it's only online because you're not going to be able to go and study on campus anywhere, even where there is provision. Um, it's important to remember that even though the provision is online, the rules of our community still apply. Suddenly, that there are no new rules just because the provision is now online. You don't now resort to social media and Facebook and Google searches, to find out whether something is credible or not. You need to still sustain the normal channels. And the normal channels, and we've said this many, many times on this show as well, the normal channels are that, alhamdulillah, we're blessed through the efforts of our forefathers to have masajid, to have some sort of local um, scholarly presence. Most of us have teachers, people who we already rely on and trust. And I would suggest that if flexibility becomes the reason why we might take some provision online, then take it from people that you already know and you already trust if they are providing it. If not, then ask them about the reliability of the provision that you are taking. I would caution against taking knowledge anonymously. Look, the idea of anonymity in knowledge is alien to Islam, right? It's alien to our epistemology. We are a community of Isnad. We are an ummah of Isnad. We're an ummah that essentially prides itself in knowing where it gets its information from, right? And knowing the standard of that information and the standard of the provider of that information, right? We're an ummah that prides in knowing who every single narrator of hadith is and what their life background is and whether they are trustworthy or not, right? We can't now suddenly resort to anonymity because of the online world, or because of, I don't know, because of some these modern phenomena. Our principles remain the same, especially when it comes to knowledge, especially when it comes to seeking Islamic knowledge. So I think the provision is there. I think the providers are there nowadays. I think a simple online search and you'll see many, but try to verify the source of knowledge through the channels that we're more familiar with, in terms of the way we would normally, if you wanted to ask a mas'ala or solve a religious problem of yours and so on, and you did have someone who you normally went to, then perhaps continue to do that and ask them if they would recommend a particular provider that you have, online Islamic learning provider that you have found or discovered. If that's not available to you, and that may well be the case, then do your homework. And when you do your homework, the things that you have to look for is, what are the credentials of the scholar? What are the credentials of the website of the provider? What are their background? What are their connections with ulama? And do they have a kind of some sort of standing in that regard? Obviously, really what we're trying to find out isn't qualifications. It's not about the number of PhDs and the number of MAs. What we want to find out is their credentials in terms of their Islamic knowledge. And those credentials are usually on the basis of, there should be some information about where people studied and who people studied with, and and if possible, there should be you should learn from people whose piety, or at least whose credential, whose reliability in terms of the piety and integrity, you know something about. And then you can go, you can then kind of be some. This is all relative to an extent, but the more you know, the better, that the more suited that source is. I think that's really, really important. And I think the thing to caution against, and I can never really emphasize this enough, is beware of anonymity. There are websites that pop up and they won't tell you who's behind the website, right? There'll be zero information on who's behind the website. There'll be some rhetoric about aims and objectives, right? And then suddenly there'll be Sheikh so and so is teaching this. And the problem with that is that sometimes shuyukh get asked to teach on platforms and they get paid a bit of money and so on. And they themselves just know somebody from the locality, but you don't know what the credentials and the aims and objectives of the platform is. And sometimes nor do the shuyukh that teach on it. So it's important that things are professionally set up, and the people. We are an ummah that knows its people, that the people behind things are known, right? And then obviously you come onto the teachers, and it's important that the teachers are known, right? Beware of anonymity.